Welcome. Let's jump right into it. Today, we're unpacking the deeply unsettling and honestly massively complex lore behind the 2026 psychological horror film, Backrooms. Now, if you thought you already knew everything about the internet's favorite creepypasta, you might want to think again. This movie takes that original concept and just explodes it into this massive, terrifying sci-fi universe. We're going to be breaking down the timeline, dissecting the monsters, and diving into the intense psychological depths of this story. So settle in, because we are heading straight into the maze. So to really get this movie, we have to start with the foundation of the whole cinematic universe. What exactly is a liminal space? Well, think about walking down a school hallway in the dead of night, or wandering through a massive shopping mall hours after it's closed. It's a transitional, empty physical space. It feels deeply familiar to you, but it's unnervingly abandoned. Your brain recognizes the setting, right? But because it's completely devoid of human life, it just sends this visceral chill right down your spine. It feels like walking through a forgotten memory. And the brilliant thing about this movie is that it takes that exact eerie feeling and turns it into a physical, inescapable dimension. All right, let's dive right into the thick of it and see how this nightmare actually begins. The film wastes zero time establishing its deadly stakes. We get this absolutely terrifying found footage opening. We're watching through the lens of a researcher named Naren Warren. He works for the super mysterious corporation called Async, and he is utterly, hopelessly trapped in this infinite maze of empty, sickly yellow rooms, frantically filming his final moments. He's managed to push farther into the maze than literally anyone before him, but he isn't alone. As this mysterious, creeping shadow figure closes in, the camera drops, and we just hear his final screams. It's an incredible hook. It tells us right away, this isn't just some spooky, weird dimension. It is a lethal, inescapable prison. Which brings us to the real world. How do our main characters actually end up stumbling into this glitchy nightmare? See, the horror doesn't just stay neatly confined to those yellow rooms. It starts bleeding directly into reality. We follow our main guy, Clark. He's running a failing furniture store, and his personal life is just completely falling apart. But here's the thing. His store is also falling apart, and in ways that literally defy physics. He starts noticing flickering basement lights. Then he finds a fuse box where the switches have been rewired upside down for no apparent reason. Next, his TV starts glitching out, broadcasting a live feed of a strange, completely empty room. But the absolute craziest, most chilling clue? There's a section of his basement wall that you can literally just phase right through. Reality itself is breaking down in his basement. So, driven by this mix of pure curiosity and total frustration, Clark does the unthinkable and pushes his own body through that solid basement wall. But he doesn't end up in those infamous yellow rooms we saw earlier. Instead, he discovers an infinite, bizarrely empty replica of his very own furniture store. And right there, hidden under a doorway, he finds an Async ID card, which actually belongs to that missing researcher we saw at the start, Naren Warren, along with a bag of videotapes. Just pause for a second and imagine that. Imagine stumbling into an alien dimension and finding out it has eerily, perfectly copied your own workplace. Talk about unsettling. So now that Clark is trapped in this liminal space, we really need to understand the terrifying rules of this maze. Because survival here absolutely requires understanding how this place operates. According to the movie's lore, the backrooms span an incomprehensible 600 million square kilometers. But listen, it is not just empty space. The dimension actively shapes itself using human trauma and memories. Whatever emotional baggage you carry inside with you, the maze literally builds a world around it. On top of that, it creates these things called still lives, which are basically emotionless, disfigured copies of the people who wander inside. Ultimately, the Backrooms acts as this massive, ever-changing archive of places from all timelines, pulling the architecture directly from the minds of its victims. A great way to think about it is like a giant, broken photocopy machine. I love this analogy from the source material because it perfectly demystifies what's happening. When Clark enters the maze, it looks exactly like his store, but it feels slightly wrong. The Backrooms is constantly trying to copy the real world using human memories. But because our memories are naturally flawed, every single copy comes out distorted, glitchy, and scary. It completely explains why there are endless repeating permutations of the exact same room, just stretching on forever. And this broken copy machine effect leads us right into the psychological core of the story, the monsters born from trauma. To really grasp the horrors they face, we've got to contrast our two leads. First up, we have Clark. His trauma is deeply rooted in his massive ego. He drinks, he constantly blames his wife for everything going wrong, he refuses to apologize, and is super bitter about never becoming an architect. Then, on the flip side, we have Mary, who happens to be Clark's therapist. Her trauma is entirely different. She grew up with a severely mentally ill, agoraphobic mother who completely isolated her from the outside world.
Basically, Mary has spent her life carrying everyone else's pain. And, as we see, their vastly different psychological baggage dictates their vastly different fates inside the maze. Now, before we meet the main monster, let's circle back to those still lives for a second. When someone enters the backrooms and their memories get absorbed by the dimension, the maze eventually spits out a replica of them. But over time, because the maze's memory is so flawed, these replicas become heavily disfigured and completely emotionless. They just wander the halls forever as these distorted physical memories. They don't feel pain or joy or fear. They literally just exist. It's such a haunting, hollow fate to think about.
And that brings us to the main threat. See, the monster in this movie isn't just some random interdimensional beast they threw in for scares. It's the pirate entity. This thing is the literal, physical manifestation of Clark's toxic ego, his anger, and all his negative emotions. Because Clark runs a furniture store that has a pirate logo, the Backrooms pulls that imagery straight from his mind to give this horrific entity a twisted, demonic pirate shape. It feeds both literally and metaphorically on his absolute refusal to grow as a person.
And the way this dynamic concludes is absolutely fascinating. There's this brilliant little Easter egg. The scene where the entity finally corners and consumes Clark actually takes place right near a throne. This is a direct visual nod to that famous painting of the Greek myth where the Titan Cronus eats his own child to protect his power. The entity desires absolute control. And the most chilling part, Clark just accepts his fate. In the Backrooms, he finally gets to be the architect of his own world, and he never has to apologize to anyone ever again. He chooses the maze. But Mary's story takes a completely different path. While Clark submits to his own ego, Mary actually fights back. When the entity corners her in this creepy replica of her childhood neighborhood, she does not surrender. Instead, she grabs a heavy concrete slab, and it's actually one that happens to bear her childhood handprints, and she physically bludgeons the monster with it. It is such an incredible visual metaphor, right? She uses her past, her actual history, to literally smash the physical manifestation of trauma to pieces. Okay, so we've seen the personal horror, but now it is time to pull back the curtain and reveal the overarching sci-fi master plan. What's the deal with async? Let's trace the timeline of how this whole mess started. Back in 2022, the Async Corporation was testing a parallel universe portal. Sounds ambitious, right? Well, moments later, a massive earthquake triggered this huge anomaly, tearing reality apart and creating the liminal space instead. Flash forward to the present day, and because of that original fracture, portals are now randomly opening up globally. We see this in the film, like that bizarre moment a strange bird just flies straight out of a solid wall by a beach. And all of this culminates in the film's climax, where Async sets a deliberate, calculated trap to capture this interdimensional SCP entity.
And here is the massive plot twist of the whole explainer. Remember those upside-down electrical switches in Clark's basement we talked about earlier? Yeah, Async did that. They deliberately rewired his electrical box. Because they knew the Backrooms recreated spaces based on human memory, they were manipulating Clark from the very beginning. They basically used his infinite replica store and his toxic emotional monster as the perfect bait. So when Mary fights the monster, she actually accidentally triggers Async's hidden trap, which floods the room with knockout gas so Async can finally capture the beast. It was a setup all along.
So what happens to Mary after all this? Honestly, it's a super bittersweet ending. She manages to escape the psychological horrors of the maze through the portal, which is great, but she wakes up in an Async research facility. And because she now knows way too much, we're talking Area 51 level secrets here, she is held captive. She's forced to work for Async, traveling the real world to track down and close all those other random portals popping up globally. She survived, but she's not free. But wait, there is one final terrifying catch to her escape. Think about this. Because Mary entered the Backrooms and survived for a while, the maze absorbed her memories too. It created a still-life replica of her. So, as the real Mary travels our world closing portals, what exactly will her flawless replica do as it wanders that infinite 600 million square kilometer maze? Will it just silently mimic her every move in the dark forever? It's a chilling thought, and it definitely leaves you wondering what else is lurking out there in the Backrooms.